A visitor of alarming stature. It is a curious thing to reflect upon the vast and varied tapestry of human woe that has been unrolled before me in the course of my long and intimate association with Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The grand stage of London, with its 7 million souls, has ever been a fertile ground for the bizarre, the terrible, and the inexplicable. Yet of all the strange narratives to which I have lent an ear, there is none which commenced with such an air of high drama, and concluded in so dark a tragedy as the matter of the unfortunate Mr. Fairdale Hobbs. The affair began upon a raw and gusty Tuesday in the late autumn. The London sky was a uniform slate grey, and a chill wind, carrying the first premonition of winter, rattled the window panes of our sitting room at 221B Baker Street. Holmes had been for some days in one of his silent and introspective moods, sunk deep in his armchair with his black-letter editions and his noxious shag tobacco. His mind, I knew, was wrestling with the arcane details of the medieval charters of the Manor of Iford, a case of some historical significance, but little immediate excitement. I had myself been attempting to lose myself in a volume of Clark Russell's sea stories, but the mournful howling of the wind in the chimney served as a constant and dreary distraction. It was shortly after 3 o'clock when the sharp peal of our doorbell cut through the afternoon's lethargy. A moment later, Mrs. Hudson showed in a visitor whose appearance was so remarkable as to instantly command our full attention. He was a man of truly stupendous height. As he stooped to enter our modest doorway, his head seemed in imminent danger of striking the lintel. Once inside, he straightened to his full stature, and I gauged him to be no less than 6'7" or even 6'8" tall. He was slender to the point of emaciation, with long dangling limbs that seemed ill-coordinated. His face, pale and haggard, was a mask of acute anxiety. His eyes, of a watery blue, darted about the room, from Holmes's impassive face to my own, and then to the cluttered corners of our familiar sanctum, as though he feared some unseen pursuer might lurk in the shadows. He was well but soberly dressed in a dark tweed suit, though it was frayed at the cuffs and hung loosely upon his gaunt frame. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, his voice a deep baritone that quavered with an emotion he struggled to master. My friend bowed with a quiet gesture of assent, waving a long, thin hand towards the client's chair. "Pray be seated, sir," he said. "You have the advantage of me, though I perceive you have travelled here by the Underground Railway from a station on the Western Line, and that your occupation is of a largely sedentary nature, despite your formidable physique." Our visitor stared, momentarily taken aback by this characteristic display of Holmes's faculty. "Why, yes," he stammered, sinking into the chair, which seemed comically undersized beneath him. "I came from Victoria. But how could you possibly... The small, dark grey smudge of soil upon the inner side of your left boot is, to my eye, quite distinctive of the clay found only during the recent excavations near Sloane Square Station," Holmes remarked, a faint glimmer of amusement in his keen grey eyes. "As for your occupation, your shoulders possess the pronounced stoop of a man who spends a great deal of his day bent over a desk or ledger, a posture made all the more necessary by your exceptional height. But these are trifles. You have come to me because you are in trouble. It is a trouble, I surmise, that is both urgent and of a terrifying nature." The man passed a trembling hand across his brow. "Terrifying is the word, Mr. Holmes. It is a horror that haunts my every waking moment and turns my sleep into a fever of dreadful dreams. My name is Fairdale Hobbs, and I believe my very life is in peril." "From whom?" asked Holmes, his languor vanishing in an instant. He leaned forward, his face now a study in concentrated intensity. "That is the heart of the matter," cried Mr. Hobbs, his voice rising in agitation. "I cannot be certain. It is a shadow, a presence, a network of whispers and threats that surrounds me. They are driving me to madness, Mr. Holmes. They call it the carnival of blood." The phrase was so startling, so imbued with a sense of grotesque melodrama, that I confess I started in my seat. Holmes, however, merely raised his eyebrows. "A carnival of blood," he repeated thoughtfully, pressing his fingertips together. "The phrase is suggestive. Pray, Mr. Hobbs, compose yourself and give me a clear and sequential account of the facts. What is this carnival, and who are they?" Our client made a visible effort to pull himself together. He took a deep, shuddering breath and began his narrative, though his words came in fits and starts, disjointed and overlaid with a profound sense of fear. "It began 3 months ago," he said. "A whisper here, a chalk mark on my door there, a stranger following me home in the fog. At first I dismissed it as fancy, the product of an overwrought imagination. I am a man of a nervous disposition, you see, a cataloguer of antiquarian books by trade. A quiet life is all I have ever desired. But the persecution has grown more direct, more menacing. What form does it take? Notes, sir, slipped under my door. They are unsigned. One said, 'The tall man casts a long shadow. Shadows must be cut down to size.' Another, just last week, read, 'The sawdust is thirsty. The carnival calls for a new act.' And this morning, Mr. Holmes, I found this pinned to my coat." He fumbled in his breast pocket and produced a small, garishly printed ticket, the sort one might purchase at a country fair. Upon it, in bold red letters, were the words, "Silas Croft's Carnival of Curiosities. Admit one to the final performance." Beneath this, scrawled in a crude, spidery hand, was the phrase, "The Carnival of Blood awaits its star." "It is devilish!" Hobbs exclaimed, his face glistening with a cold sweat. "I have no connection to any carnival. I have never heard of this Silas Croft. It is a cruel and monstrous joke designed to unseat my reason." "Or a deadly serious warning," Holmes murmured, taking the ticket and examining it with minute attention through his pocket lens. "The paper is of cheap wood pulp, the ink common. The handwriting, however, is of some interest. The pressure is uneven, suggesting great agitation or perhaps a physical infirmity in the writer. The formation of the B and R is distinctly continental. And you say you have no notion of its origin?" "None whatsoever. I have lived a life of quiet seclusion. I have no enemies. I am a simple man, Mr. Holmes, a man who has caused harm to no one." He suddenly sprang to his feet, his great height seeming to diminish the size of our room, and began to pace back and forth like a caged animal. "They watch me. I feel their eyes upon me even now. This city has become a prison. I dare not walk the streets after dark. The creak of a floorboard in my lodging-house sends me into a panic. I cannot eat. I cannot work. They mean to kill me, Mr. Holmes. I know it." His agitation was so extreme that it bordered on hysteria. His long arms flailed and his voice cracked with strain. "But why, man? What is the motive?" Holmes pressed, his tone calm but firm. "I do not know. Unless it is because of my past, something I thought long buried. And what is that? Mr. Hobbs stopped his pacing and turned to face us, his expression one of deep shame and misery. Before I found my calling amongst books, I was different. As a young man, desperate and impoverished, I sold my peculiarity. For 2 years I was Goliath the Gentle Giant, a featured attraction in a travelling show. It was a life of degradation and mockery, Mr. Holmes, which I fled as soon as I was able. I changed my name. I sought anonymity. Perhaps someone from that old life has found me. That seems a most promising line of inquiry, said Holmes. What was the name of this show? Bartholomew's Fair of Wonders, but it was disbanded a decade ago. Bartholomew himself is dead. The performers scattered to the four winds. Suddenly our client froze, his head cocked as if listening to some sound from the street below. His eyes widened in terror. "Heavens, what was that?" he whispered. I had heard nothing but the rattle of a passing cab, but to Fairdale Hobbs's strained senses it was clearly a signal of imminent danger. "I must go," he said abruptly, snatching his hat from the table. "I have been here too long. They will have followed me. I am not safe anywhere." "On the contrary," Holmes said, rising. "You are safer here than anywhere else. Sit down, Mr. Hobbs, and we shall talk this through. I will not abandon you to this unseen terror." But the man was beyond reason. His panic was absolute. "No, no, I cannot. It is folly to remain. I shall return, Mr. Holmes. I must first ensure I was not followed. I will come back this evening after dark, when the shadows can hide me. I will bring proof. At 9 o'clock. Expect me then." And before Holmes or I could make a move to detain him, he had wrenched open the door and was clattering down the 17 steps to the street at a perilous pace. We heard the front door slam shut behind him, and from the window I caught a fleeting glimpse of his towering figure hurrying away through the grey, swirling mist, his long coat flapping behind him like the wings of some great frantic bird. Holmes stood by the window for a long moment, a frown creasing his brow. "Well, Watson," he said at last, turning back into the room, "what do you make of that?" "A clear case of persecution mania, I should think," I ventured. "The man is on the verge of a complete nervous collapse. His own past in a freak show has likely preyed upon his mind, causing him to invent these elaborate fantasies of carnivals and unseen enemies." "It is a possible diagnosis," Holmes conceded, refilling his pipe. "And yet his terror seemed remarkably genuine. And there's the matter of the ticket. A hallucination does not print a physical object, Watson. No, there is something more here. Something tangible and sinister. A man does not flee in mortal terror from a phantom of his own creation." He fell silent, and for the next several hours the sitting room was quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and the occasional plume of blue smoke that rose from my friend's chair. We dined with little conversation, our thoughts full of our strange and fleeting visitor. As the clock on the mantelpiece ticked towards 9, a sense of anticipation settled over us. I found myself frequently glancing towards the door, expecting at any moment to hear the tread of our gigantic client upon the stair. But 9 o'clock came and went. The hands of the clock crept towards 10, and then to past. The wind still howled outside, and the occasional spatter of rain lashed against the windows, but of Mr. Fairdale Hobbs there was no sign. "He is not coming," I said at last. "Evidently not," replied Holmes, his voice betraying a note of concern. Either his courage failed him, or something has prevented his return. He rose and went once more to the window, peering down into the dark, rain-swept street. "I fear, my dear Watson," he said, his back still to me, "that this simple matter of Fairdale Hobbs may have already taken a turn for the grave." A silence and a theory. The following day dawned as drearily as its predecessor, and still no word had come from our client. The chair where his colossal frame had perched seemed to hold a ghostly imprint of his presence, and his desperate, fear-filled words echoed in my memory. By midday, Holmes's concern had sharpened into active impatience. He paced the confines of our room with the restless energy of a caged panther, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "It is not like him to break his word, Watson," he remarked, pausing in his perambulations. The man was in the grip of a terror so profound that he saw our rooms as his only sanctuary. For him to promise a return with proof no less, and then to vanish, suggests that his will was subjugated by a stronger force. "You mean he was intercepted?" I asked. "It is the most logical hypothesis. He fled from here in a state of high alarm, convinced he was being watched. Such a man is an easy target. He would be looking over his shoulder, but not perhaps at the friendly cabman who pulls up to offer him a ride, or the helpful stranger who directs him down a dark and secluded alley. But we have nothing to go on, Holmes. We have only his name and the address of his lodgings, which, in his panic, he neglected to provide." "A temporary inconvenience," my friend replied, a sharp glint in his eye. "A man of his singular appearance cannot simply disappear in a city like London without leaving a ripple. We shall cast our net." His first step was to dispatch a telegram to his brother, Mycroft. The message was concise. "Require any information on an enterprise known as Silas Croft's Carnival of Curiosities. Note any unusual incidents, accidents, or police attention. S.H." His second step was to summon the leader of his unofficial police force, the Baker Street Division of the Detective Police Force, as he humorously called them. A shrill whistle from the window soon brought a ragged, sharp-faced urchin by the name of Wiggins to our door. "Wiggins," said Holmes, peering down at the boy, "I have a commission for you and your cohorts. I'm seeking a man. He is a giant, taller than any policeman you have ever seen. His name is Fairdale Hobbs. He is a cataloguer of old books. I want every bookshop, every library, every lodging house in the Bloomsbury district searched. A shilling for every report and a guinea for the man who finds his address." The boy's eyes lit up at the mention of the sums, and with a quick salute he was gone, his bare feet pattering down the stairs. "Now, Watson, we must construct a working theory," Holmes continued, resuming his pacing. "Let us dismiss your idea of delusion. Let us assume Hobbs was sane and that his fears were grounded in reality. He was being persecuted by a person or persons connected to a carnival for reasons related to his own past as a performer. What does that suggest to you? That this Silas Croft holds a grudge against him, perhaps? Possible, but unlikely to manifest in such a theatrical and protracted manner. A simple grudge usually leads to a direct confrontation, a blow from a cudgel in a dark lane. This campaign of terror, the notes, the ticket, the chalk marks, it is designed to torment, to break the man's spirit before breaking his body. It speaks of a cold, calculating, and somewhat flamboyant intelligence. It is not the work of a common brute. He picked up the garish ticket from the mantelpiece. "Silas Croft's Carnival of Curiosities," he read aloud. "The name itself is a study in psychology. Not a menagerie or a fair, but a carnival of curiosities. It suggests a purveyor of the strange, the outre. It implies a collection of human anomalies. Men like our Mr. Hobbs. So you believe this carnival is a modern successor to the old Bartholomew's Fair he spoke of?" "Precisely. The world of the travelling show is a small and insular one, Watson. Performers drift from one enterprise to another. Reputations and grudges follow them. It is highly probable that someone at Croft's Carnival knew Goliath the Gentle Giant from a decade ago and has now recognised him as Mr. Fairdale Hobbs, the respectable book cataloguer. But for what purpose? Blackmail? That is the obvious motive. A man who has fought to create a new, respectable life would pay dearly to keep the secret of his past as a sideshow freak. Perhaps Hobbs refused to pay. Perhaps he could not pay. The persecution would then escalate, intended to frighten him into compliance. But the phrase "carnival of blood" suggests something more sinister than mere extortion. He fell silent, lost in thought. For the remainder of the afternoon, we waited. The reply from Mycroft arrived just as the gas lamps were being lit in the street below. Holmes tore it open and read it aloud. "Silas Croft's Carnival of Curiosities," it read. "Provincial touring company of low repute. Winters in a permanent encampment at Mitcham Marshes. Specialises in human oddities and acts of dubious sensationalism. Has been moved on by constabulary in 3 separate counties this year for public nuisance and suspected rigged gaming. No major criminal charges filed, but persistent rumours of violence and exploitation of performers. Silas Croft himself is an American, ex-Barnum, with a reputation for sharp practice. No official record of any carnival of blood. Query: is this a theatrical billing? M.H. Mitcham Marshes, Holmes mused, folding the telegram. A dismal, isolated spot. The perfect place to hide a secret or dispose of a body. And Croft is an American, an ex-Barnum man. That explains the showmanship, the theatricality of the threats. It has the scent of sawdust and cheap sensationalism about it. Just then, a commotion from the street below announced the return of the irregulars. Wiggins, flushed with success, was ushered in by Mrs. Hudson. "We've found him, Mr. Olmes," the boy chirped, holding out a grubby slip of paper. "Or where he lives, at any rate. Lodgings at number 24, Great Russell Street, just a stone's throw from the museum. The landlady's in a right state. Says a giant lodger ain't been seen since yesterday afternoon. Went out in a tearin' hurry, she says, and never came back for his supper." Holmes's eyes shone. He tossed the boy a golden guinea, which Wiggins caught with an expert flick of the wrist. "Excellent work, Wiggins. You have earned your fee. Watson, get your hat and coat. The game is afoot. We are going to Great Russell Street." The vacant room. The cab ride to Bloomsbury was a short one, and in a matter of minutes we were standing before a tall, narrow-fronted Georgian house that had seen better days. The paint on the door was peeling, and the fanlight above it was clouded with the grime of years. Our knock was answered by a stout, red-faced woman in a frilled cap and a flour-dusted apron. Her expression was a mixture of anxiety and suspicion. "And what might you be wanting?" she demanded, her hands on her hips. "I believe you have a lodger by the name of Mr. Fairdale Hobbs," said Holmes in his most placatory tone. "We are colleagues of his from the London Antiquarian Society, and we have grown concerned by his absence." The woman's defensive posture softened at once. "Oh, you're friends of poor Mr. Hobbs? Thank heavens! I'm Mrs. Warren, his landlady. I've been worried sick. He's such a quiet, gentle soul for all his size. Never a bit of trouble. But he shot out of here yesterday like the devil was on his heels and hasn't been seen since. Not a word. It's not like him at all." "May we see his rooms, Mrs. Warren?" Holmes asked. "It is possible he has left some note, some indication of his intentions." Of course. Come this way, gentlemen." She led us up 2 flights of creaking stairs to a door at the very top of the house. The room was clearly the cheapest in the establishment, tucked away under the eaves. Mrs. Warren unlocked the door and allowed us to enter. It was a simple, sparsely furnished attic room, dominated by a large desk littered with books, papers, and the tools of a cataloguer's trade. The bed in the corner was neatly made, but what was most striking was that the room had been evidently customized to accommodate its gigantic occupant. The bed frame had been crudely extended with blocks of wood. The single armchair had extra long legs bolted to its base. It was a poignant testament to the daily discomforts of Mr. Hobbs's life. Holmes moved into the room with the quiet, focused grace of a hunting dog on a scent. His eyes scanned every detail, missing nothing. "He has not slept here, Watson," he observed, pointing to the unrumpled bedspread. "He went out yesterday and did not return. Now, what can this room tell us?" He began a systematic examination. He glanced at the books on the shelf, dry tomes on incunabula and paleography. He peered at the papers on the desk, pages of neat, meticulous cataloguing notes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. "Mrs. Warren," he said, turning to the landlady who hovered anxiously in the doorway, "did Mr. Hobbs have any regular visitors?" "Never. He kept to himself, did Mr. Hobbs. Said the world had seen enough of him. The only person he ever spoke to for more than a minute was little Rosie from the flower stall on the corner. He'd buy a posy from her every Saturday, regular as clockwork." Holmes nodded. "Did you notice anything unusual in his behaviour leading up to his disappearance?" "Well, he'd been jumpy for weeks," she replied. "Always starting at sounds, peering out the window. Said he was feeling unwell, but it looked more like fear to me. And there was a man, a strange-looking fellow, who came asking for him a few days ago." "Indeed? Can you describe him?" Holmes's voice was sharp with interest. Small he was, wiry, with a dark tanned face like a gypsy, and the brightest, most peculiar green eyes I've ever seen. Dressed flashy, too, in a checked suit and a bowler hat. I told him Mr. Hobbs wasn't in, and he just gave a nasty little smile and said, "He will be. The carnival always finds its own." Gave me a right shiver, he did. "The carnival always finds its own," Holmes repeated softly. The net was closing around him. "Thank you, Mrs. Warren. You have been most helpful." He turned his attention back to the room. I watched him, knowing that his seemingly casual glances were part of a complex process of observation and deduction. He knelt to examine the floorboards, ran his finger along the window ledge, and peered into the small, cold fireplace. Finally, he came to a small, locked wooden trunk that stood at the foot of the bed. "The key, Mrs. Warren?" "He kept it on his person, sir. Never let it out of his sight." "No matter." Holmes drew from his pocket a small leather case and selected a thin piece of bent wire. With a deft manipulation that was over in a second, the lock clicked open. He lifted the lid. The contents were mundane, a few spare sets of clothes carefully folded, and a small collection of personal keepsakes. But as Holmes lifted out a thick woolen jumper, a small, leather-bound diary fell to the floor. Holmes snatched it up and opened it. Most of the pages were filled with notes on bookbinding and watermarks, but the entries for the past few weeks were of a different character entirely. They were short, frantic, and filled with a growing sense of dread. October 12th. Saw the little man again today. The one with the snake's eyes. He followed me all the way from Sotheby's. He knows. After all these years, he knows. October 19th. A chalk drawing of a gallows on my door this morning. I am being hunted like an animal. October 24th. The note. The sawdust is thirsty. God help me. It is Croft. It must be. He never forgave anyone. November 2nd, the ticket, the final summons. I can run no longer. I must seek help. There is a man they speak of, a Mr. Holmes, in Baker Street. They say he's a court of last resort. Perhaps he can save me from the Carnival of Blood. The Carnival of Blood? I read over Holmes's shoulder. So it was a name he had heard before. It was not a product of his own imagination. No, Watson. It is the key to this entire affair. Holmes tucked the diary into his pocket. This confirms it all. The man with the green eyes, the escalating threats, the connection to this Croft. Hobbs was not deluded. He was a man marked for death. His eyes continued their sweep of the room and suddenly came to rest on the wastepaper basket beside the desk. It was empty, save for one small crumpled ball of paper. Holmes carefully retrieved it and smoothed it out upon the desk. It was a photograph, old and faded, torn from a newspaper or a playbill. It showed a lineup of performers from a travelling show, posed stiffly before a painted backdrop. There was a bearded lady, a pair of dwarfish twins, a fire-eater, and in the centre of them all, towering over the rest, was a much younger, sad-eyed Fairdale Hobbs, billed as Goliath. But it was not Hobbs that drew Holmes's attention. He pointed a long finger at a small, wiry man standing at the edge of the group. He was dressed in a spangled costume and held a set of juggling pins. His face was dark and sharp-featured, and even in the poor quality of the photograph, one could make out a pair of intense, compelling eyes. "Unless I am much mistaken, Watson," Holmes said in a low voice, "we are looking at the man with the green eyes. The messenger. And look here, at the man standing beside him." He indicated a stout, broad-shouldered man with a magnificent black moustache and a top hat perched at a jaunty angle. He had his arms slung around the shoulders of the bearded lady, a look of proprietorial arrogance on his face. Beneath the picture, the caption read, "Bartholomew's Fair of Wonders and its impresario, Mr. Silas Croft." "Croft!" I exclaimed. But Hobbs said the owner was Bartholomew, and that Croft ran a different carnival. "A lie," said Holmes, "or rather a calculated deception. Names can be changed. Perhaps Bartholomew was a partner, or a fiction. Or perhaps, after Bartholomew's death, Croft simply took over the enterprise and rebranded it. The personnel, however, seem to have remained. This photograph is our link. It connects Hobbs, the green-eyed man, and Silas Croft himself to the same troupe a decade ago." He stared at the photograph for a long moment, his expression grim. They have hunted him down, Watson. The old pack has reassembled under a new name and has run its quarry to the ground. Our client walked out of this house yesterday afternoon and into a trap laid for him by his past. And what of Hobbs now? I asked. Holmes carefully folded the photograph and placed it in his wallet alongside the diary. I have very little doubt, my dear fellow, that Mr. Fairdale Hobbs is dead. Our task now is no longer to protect a client, but to avenge him, and to do that, we must pay a visit to the carnival. Silas Croft's Carnival of Curiosities. Our journey to the Mitcham Marshes the following day was a descent into a landscape of profound desolation. We took a train to the nearest suburban station, and from there hired a dog cart, which conveyed us across a flat, featureless expanse of sodden fields and scrubland, crisscrossed by sluggish, reed-choked dikes. A persistent weeping mist clung to the ground, blurring the horizon and lending a spectral quality to the skeletal trees that dotted the landscape. It was a place where secrets could be easily kept, and a man could disappear without a trace. After a jolting ride of some 2 miles, we saw it. A cluster of painted wagons and grimy canvas tents huddled together in a muddy field, looking like a handful of discarded, gaudy toys. A faded banner, flapping listlessly in the damp air, proclaimed it to be Silas Croft, Carnival of Curiosities. The place was largely dormant, the silence broken only by the mournful lowing of a cow in a nearby field and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Holmes had, of course, prepared for the occasion. Gone was the sharp, incisive detective of Baker Street. In his place sat a loud, coarse-featured individual with the florid complexion and checkered suit of a racetrack tout. A pair of brassy spectacles were perched on his nose, and he spoke with a broad provincial accent that was utterly convincing. He had introduced himself to me as Mr. Abner, a man with a bit of capital to invest in the show business. I, in my turn, was his dour and respectable solicitor, Mr. Timms, present to ensure the soundness of any potential transaction. "A sorry-looking spot, eh, Timms?" Holmes boomed as we dismounted from the cart. "Still, mustn't judge a book by its cover. There's gold to be found in the mud, as they say." We made our way across the churned-up ground towards the largest of the wagons, a magnificent but dilapidated structure painted in peeling gold and crimson, with the words, "The Impresario," inscribed above the door. As we approached, a pair of dogs, chained to a post, set up a furious barking. The door of the wagon was thrown open, and a man emerged. He was of middle height, but powerfully built, with a barrel chest and the thick, muscular neck of a bull. His face was swarthy, his hair slick with pomade, and a pair of shrewd black eyes appraised us from beneath heavy brows. I recognized him at once from the photograph. It was Silas Croft. "Call off your dogs, man!" Holmes shouted, feigning alarm. "We're here on business." Croft silenced the hounds with a guttural command. "Business," he said, his voice a low growl. He spoke with an American accent, a gravelly drawl that was both menacing and oddly charismatic. "What sort of business brings gentlemen like you to a place like this?" "The sort of business that involves money, Mr. Croft," said Holmes, striding forward with a swagger. "I'm in the market for a new venture. I've heard your show has potential. I'm here to see if it's worth a punt." Croft's suspicious expression softened fractionally, replaced by a greedy glint. "You've come to the right place, mister. Silas Croft's Carnival is the finest collection of marvels on the road. Step into my office." He led us up a short flight of steps into the wagon. The interior was as gaudy and deceptive as the exterior. The walls were draped in cheap velvet, and the air was thick with the smells of stale cigars, brandy, and unwashed linen. A large desk, cluttered with ledgers and bottles, stood at one end, and a number of framed posters adorned the walls, depicting in lurid colours the attractions of the show. Zoltan the Mystic, Reader of Fates, the Brawn Brothers, Pillars of Hercules, and Mademoiselle Evangeline and her fearless felines. "Take a seat, gents," Croft said, waving a hand towards a pair of rickety chairs. He poured 3 glasses of brandy with a heavy hand. "So, you're an investor?" "A connoisseur of the curious," Holmes corrected him. "I've had a hand in everything from performing dogs to boxing kangaroos. I'm looking for the next big thing. I hear you have a fine collection of oddities." Croft laughed, a harsh, humourless sound. "The best. A 2-headed calf, a woman with a beard you could plait, a man who can swallow swords. But talent is hard to come by, and even harder to keep." "Indeed," said Holmes, sipping his brandy. "I imagine loyalty can be a problem in your line of work." "You have no idea," Croft grumbled. "They come and they go. Ungrateful, the lot of them. You give them a home, a purpose, and they run off the first chance they get. Or they get careless." "Careless?" Holmes prompted. "It's a dangerous life," Croft said with a shrug. "We had a fire-eater, fine artist he was, swallowed a bit of bad paraffin last year. Unfortunate. And one of our acrobats missed his timing. A terrible tragedy. The show must go on, you know." His eyes were hard and devoid of any emotion as he spoke. I felt a chill run down my spine. I was certain this man was describing murders as if they were mundane occupational hazards. "A tough business," Holmes said, shaking his head in feigned sympathy. "Tell me, Croft, are you in the market for new talent? I happened to see a fellow in London the other day, a giant, the tallest man I've ever laid eyes on, a real spectacle, would draw in the crowds, a man like that." I held my breath, waiting for Croft's reaction. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something, recognition, anger, caution, crossed his face. It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of casual indifference. "A giant, eh?" he said slowly. "There was a time a giant was worth his weight in gold. Not so much anymore. Public wants something more. Exciting. More blood for their shilling." He leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Now, if you want a real spectacle, I'm working on a new act. A high-wire act over a cage of hungry lions. Now that's entertainment." It was a blatant attempt to change the subject. Holmes, however, was not to be deterred. "Still," he insisted, "a man of that stature, he must be 6'8", if he's an inch. Name of Hobbs, I think he said." Croft stood up abruptly. "Never heard of him," he snapped. His bonhomie had vanished, replaced by a simmering hostility. "I've got no use for has-beens. Now, if you want to talk investment, we can talk figures. If you want to waste my time talking about every tall man in London, the gate is over there." "No offence intended," Holmes said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Just making conversation. Of course, the investment is what we're here for. Perhaps you'd be so good as to give us a tour of your establishment. Let us see the talent for ourselves." Croft hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized my friend's face. For a moment I thought he would refuse, that Holmes's disguise had been rumbled. But the lure of potential investment was too strong. "All right," he said grudgingly. "Follow me, but watch your step. The ground is treacherous, and so are some of the people." He led us out of the wagon and into the damp, grey afternoon. The tour had begun. We were walking into the heart of the enemy's camp, a place of tawdry spectacle, and I was now utterly convinced of dark and deadly secrets among the painted wagons. Silas Croft led us on a tour of his dismal kingdom. We saw the pen that held the two-headed calf, a pathetic, bleating creature that seemed a cruel mockery of nature. We were introduced to Serpentina, the snake-skinned woman, whose skin condition was presented as a marvel, and to the human pincushion, a man whose act consisted of enduring pain with a stoic grimace. The performers themselves were a sad and sullen lot. They went through the motions of displaying their peculiar talents for Holmes's benefit, but their eyes were uniformly dull and joyless. A palpable air of fear and oppression hung over the entire encampment. It was clear that these people were not colleagues of Silas Croft, but his prisoners, bound to him by poverty, desperation, and a terror of his authority. Our tour brought us to a large tent, where two enormously muscular men were practicing a strongman act, lifting huge iron-studded weights. They were identical twins, with low brows, brutish faces, and a startling lack of expression. "My star attractions," Croft announced with a proprietary air. "The Braun brothers, Leo and Leander, strongest men in the world." The brothers paused their exercise and glowered at us with undisguised hostility. Their silence was more intimidating than any threat. I had no doubt that these were Croft's enforcers, the physical muscle that backed up his rule of fear. As we watched, a small, wiry man darted out from behind the tent. He was dressed in a gaudy checked suit and had a ferret-like face. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were a startling, luminous green. It was the man from the photograph, the man who had terrified Mrs. Warren. "Finn!" Croft barked. "What are you skulking about for?" The man, Finn, gave a nervous smile that did not reach his eyes. "Just checking the rigging for the high wire, boss. Got to be safe." "This is Mr. Abner," Croft said, gesturing to Holmes, "a potential investor. So see that you behave." Finn's green eyes flickered over Holmes, then me, with a sharp, assessing glance. He nodded curtly and then scurried away, disappearing between two wagons. "A useful man, that Finn," Croft remarked. "A juggler, a rigger, a jack of all trades. Knows which side his bread is buttered on." We moved on, but Holmes's attention had clearly been snagged. We were next taken to a large circular cage where a woman in dusty velvets was listlessly putting a trio of leopards through their paces. She was Mademoiselle Evangeline of the Fearless Felines. She was a handsome woman, perhaps in her late 30s, with a cascade of dark hair and a tragic, haunted expression in her dark eyes. "A true artist, this one," said Croft, a strange mixture of pride and contempt in his voice. "A real French aristocrat, down on her luck. The cats adore her." The woman said nothing, merely directing the animals with a flick of her whip and a soft command. But as we turned to leave, her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and in their depths I saw a desperate plea, a silent cry for help. Our tour concluded back at Croft's wagon. "Well, Mr. Abner," the impresario said, his avaricious smile returning. "What do you think? A gold mine, am I right?" "Very impressive," Holmes boomed. "Very impressive indeed. A fine collection. I'll need to discuss the matter with my solicitor here. We'll be in touch, Croft. You can count on it." We took our leave and made our way back to where our dog-cart waited. As we climbed aboard, I glanced back at the carnival. It seemed a place of utter misery, a garish facade hiding a world of cruelty and despair. "Well, Holmes," I said as we jolted away across the marsh, "what are your impressions?" "That we have found a nest of vipers, Watson," he replied, his jovial disguise falling away to reveal his own grim features. "Croft is the master, the Brawn brothers are his fangs, and the man Finn is his venom. They rule that place through terror. You saw the eyes of those poor souls. They are not performers, they are slaves." "And Mademoiselle Evangeline?" I asked. I felt she was trying to communicate with us. "I agree. She is afraid, but she has not yet been broken like the others. She may be our way in, but we must be careful. Croft is no fool. He was suspicious of my questions about the giant. He knows more than he is letting on. What is our next step?" "We must find a way to speak with one of the performers, away from the watchful eyes of Croft and his minions. Our best hope is Mademoiselle Evangeline, but we cannot simply walk back in. We need a pretext, a way to isolate her." We returned to London in thoughtful silence. That evening, Holmes, after a long period of deep concentration, suddenly slapped his knee. "I have it, Watson. The very thing," he exclaimed. "Croft's weakness is his greed, his ambition is his showmanship. We shall use both against him." He spent the next hour composing a letter. It was written on expensive cream-laid paper and penned in a flourishing aristocratic hand. It was addressed to Mademoiselle Evangeline, care of Silas Croft's carnival, and purported to be from a Lord Belden, a wealthy and eccentric nobleman with a passion for exotic animals. In the letter, Lord Belden expressed his profound admiration for Mademoiselle Evangeline's act, which he claimed to have witnessed during a previous tour. He stated his desire to purchase one of her magnificent leopards for his private menagerie, and proposed a meeting to discuss the matter. He would, he wrote, send his agent to the Three Feathers, an inn in the nearby village of Mitcham, at noon the day after next, to meet with her and negotiate a price. A handsome sum was suggested, a figure large enough to tempt Croft into allowing the meeting. "Croft will not be able to resist the lure of a lord's money," Holmes explained as he sealed the letter. "He will see it as a chance to curry favour with the aristocracy, and more importantly, to fleece a wealthy fool. He will undoubtedly send Evangeline to the meeting, but he will also, I am certain, send one of his watchdogs with her, probably the odious Finn. That, my dear Watson, is where you come in." "Me, Holmes?" "Precisely. While I, in the guise of Lord Belden's agent, engage Finn in a protracted negotiation over the price of a leopard that does not exist, you will have a clear 15 minutes to speak with Mademoiselle Evangeline. You must win her confidence and learn what she knows about Fairdale Hobbs and the Carnival of Blood. Everything depends upon your tact and your nerve." And so the plan was laid. A day later we were back in the dreary environs of Mitcham. Holmes, now disguised as a dapper, elderly gentleman's agent, proceeded to the Three Feathers Inn. My own role was to conceal myself in the inn's stable yard and, at the opportune moment, to approach the leopard tamer. I confess my heart beat a little faster than usual. I was no longer a mere chronicler of events. I was an active participant in a dangerous game, and the stakes were a man's life. Whispers in the sawdust. The Three Feathers was a ramshackle wayside inn with peeling paint and a sagging roof. I found a suitable hiding place in the shadows of an old hay wagon in the stable yard, which afforded me a clear view of the inn's entrance. Shortly before noon, a small pony and trap clattered into the yard. At the reins was the wiry, green-eyed man, Finn. Beside him sat Mademoiselle Evangeline. She was dressed in what was clearly her finest attire, a dark travelling cloak and a hat with a rather pathetic-looking feather. But her face was pale, and her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Finn tethered the pony and then turned to her, his voice a low, menacing hiss that carried across the yard. "Now you listen to me. The boss wants this to go smooth. You talk about the cat, you agree to the price, and that's it. No chit-chat, no sob stories. You understand?" She nodded mutely, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Good. Now get inside. I'll be right behind you." As they entered the inn, I heard Holmes's voice in his new persona, greeting them warmly. The trap was laid. I settled down to wait. It was one of the longest quarter hours of my life. The minutes crawled by, marked only by the drip of water from a leaky gutter and the cooing of pigeons in the eaves. Finally, the inn door opened again. Mademoiselle Evangeline emerged alone. She walked slowly towards a wooden bench at the edge of the yard, her shoulders slumped in an attitude of despair. This was my moment. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out from behind the wagon. "Mademoiselle Evangeline!" She started violently, a cry of alarm escaping her lips. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Do not be afraid," I said quickly, keeping my voice low. "My name is Dr. Watson. I'm a friend of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. We are investigating the disappearance of a man named Fairdale Hobbs. We believe you can help us." The mention of Hobbs's name had a visible effect on her. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a dawning comprehension, and then by a profound sadness. "Fairdale," she whispered, her voice husky with a faint French accent. "He was a kind man, a gentle soul. Is it true? Is he gone?" "We fear the worst," I replied gravely. "We know he was connected to this carnival, and we know he was in terrible danger. Can you tell us what happened?" She glanced nervously back towards the inn. "We cannot talk here. Finn will be watching. My friend is keeping him occupied. He thinks he is selling a leopard to a lord's agent. We have a little time." She seemed to make a decision. The hunted look in her eyes gave way to a spark of defiance. "Mr. Croft killed him," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. "Just as he killed the others." "The others?" I prompted. "The carnival of blood?" She flinched at the phrase. "So you know the name. It is what we call it, we who are trapped here. It is what we whisper to each other in the dark. Silas Croft does not tolerate anyone who defies him or anyone who knows too much. There was Antoine, the fire-eater. He learned Croft was skimming money from our wages. He had an accident with his fuel. And there was Marco, the acrobat. He tried to run away. He had a fall. They are buried in the marsh, both of them. And Fairdale Hobbs. He was here 10 years ago, when it was still Bartholomew's. Croft was the manager then. Hobbs, he saw something Croft did. A quarrel with a local man over a gambling debt. The man's body was found in a dike. Everyone said it was an accident, but Hobbs knew better. He fled the carnival in the night and was never seen again. Until now, I said. Yes. A few months ago, Finn saw him in London. Finn has a memory like a devil. He recognized Hobbs at once and reported it to Croft. Croft realized that Hobbs was the one loose end from his past, a man who could expose him as a murderer. So he began to torment him. The notes? The threats? It is Croft's way. He enjoys the fear. He likes to play with his victims before he finishes the game. He sent Finn to terrorize Hobbs, to drive him mad with fear, to isolate him. He wanted to break his spirit before he silenced him forever. When was the last time you saw him? 2 days ago, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. They brought him to the carnival, the Brawn brothers. He was gagged and bound in the back of a wagon. He looked broken. I saw them take him to the old blacksmith's forge at the edge of the camp. I heard a shout, and then nothing. They said he had run away. But I know he is dead. Her story was delivered in a torrent of whispered, desperate words. It was a confession of the horrors she had lived with, a dam of fear that had finally burst. "Why do you stay?" I asked gently. "Why not go to the police?" She gave a bitter laugh. "And tell them what? That a powerful man has murdered vagrants and runaways? Who would believe me, a poor carnival woman, against him? He would deny everything, and he would find me. There is nowhere I could go where he would not find me. My cats, they are all I have. He would kill them to punish me." The inn door creaked open. Finn was standing on the threshold, his green eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What's this?" he snarled, striding towards us. "What are you doing talking to her?" "The lady was feeling faint, my good man," I said, improvising quickly. "The stale air of the taproom, you know. I was merely offering my assistance as a medical man." Finn was not convinced. He grabbed Evangeline's arm in a cruel grip. "The boss said no talking. We're leaving." He began to drag her towards the trap, but as she passed me, she managed, with a movement so swift I almost missed it, to press a small object into my hand. Finn bundled her into the trap, and a moment later they were rattling out of the yard. Holmes emerged from the inn, his face a mask of polite frustration. "The fellow is an impossible negotiator, Mr. Timms," he said in his agent's voice for Finn's benefit. "Quite unreasonable. I fear Lord Belden will have to look elsewhere for his leopard." Once the trap was out of sight, he dropped the pretense. "Quickly, Watson, what did you learn?" I recounted Evangeline's entire story. Holmes listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with every word. "So it is as we suspected," he said when I'd finished. "A systematic campaign of murder with our poor client as the latest victim. And she confirmed the blacksmith's forge as the location. That is where we must look for our proof." "She gave me this," I said, opening my hand. It was a key, a small, simple iron key, rusted from disuse. "A key to what?" "I do not know. She had no time to explain." Holmes took the key and examined it closely. "It is not a key to a door, Watson. The bit is too simple. It is for a padlock or a chest, a small one. She has given us a clue, a piece of the puzzle she dared not speak aloud. Whatever this key unlocks is vital." He pocketed the key. "Our next move is clear. Tonight, when the carnival sleeps, we will pay a visit to the blacksmith's forge. We must find what the Brawn brothers left and what Mademoiselle Evangeline wants us to find. The strongman's secret. That night, under the cloak of a moonless sky, we made our way back across the treacherous marshland. Holmes had exchanged his disguise for his usual dark travelling clothes and carried a small leather bag containing a variety of useful implements, including a jemmy, a lantern with a shutter, and his revolver. The carnival was dark and silent, a city of slumbering ghosts. The only sound was the sighing of the wind through the canvas and the occasional stir of a restless animal. We moved with the utmost stealth, our feet making little sound on the damp earth. The blacksmith's forge was a derelict wooden structure that stood apart from the main encampment, its roof sagging and its windows boarded up. It was here, according to Evangeline, that Fairdale Hobbs had met his end. Holmes produced a thin blade from his bag and, in a moment, had slipped the primitive lock on the door. We crept inside, pulling the door shut behind us. The air within was cold and smelled of rust, coal dust, and something else. A faint, coppery, and altogether unpleasant odour that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Holmes slid open the shutter of his lantern, casting a narrow beam of light around the interior. It was a scene of utter neglect. A great, dusty bellows stood beside a cold hearth. Anvils, hammers, and tongs lay scattered on the dirt floor, thick with cobwebs and rust. "Tread carefully, Watson," Holmes whispered. "We are on the scene of a murder. Every speck of dust may be evidence." He began a minute examination of the forge, his eyes missing nothing. He noted the fresh scuff marks on the floor, the overturned bucket in the corner, and the dark, ominous stains on the packed earth near the hearth. "There was a struggle here," he murmured, "a desperate one. Our Mr. Hobbs, for all his gentle nature, did not die without a fight." He focused his attention on the great stone hearth of the forge itself. "If I wished to dispose of a body in such a place, where fire is readily available, I would use the forge. But a man of Hobbs's size, it would be a difficult and time-consuming task. There would be remains. No, Croft is too clever for that. He would want the body to disappear completely." His beam of light played over the floor around the hearth, and then he let out a low exclamation. "Ah!" He pointed to a large flat iron plate set into the floor a few feet from the forge. At one edge of the plate was a small, recessed iron ring. "What is it, Holmes?" "An old quenching trough, I suspect, or a cistern. Common in forges of this type, used for cooling hot metal." He handed me the lantern, and gripping the iron ring with both hands, heaved. With a low groan of rusted metal, the plate lifted, revealing a square, dark opening beneath. A wave of foul, stagnant air washed over us. Holmes peered into the darkness. "It's a well, Watson. Deep and full of black, stagnant water. The perfect hiding place. No one would ever think to look here." He fell silent for a moment. Poor Hobbs, to be hunted and terrified, only to end his days in this black pit. His voice was cold, with an anger I had seldom seen in him. It was the anger of an avenging angel. "Croft will pay for this," he said softly, "but we need more than a suspicion. We need concrete proof to take to Scotland Yard. A body in a well is not enough. We must tie Croft directly to the crime." He let the iron plate fall back into place with a dull thud. "The key, Watson. Evangeline's key. It is our only remaining hope." We began to search the forge again, this time not for signs of the murder, but for the lock that the key might fit. We checked every crate, every cupboard, every corner of the squalid building. We found nothing. "It is not here," I said, frustrated. "Perhaps it is for something in her own wagon." "No," said Holmes. "She said they took Hobbs to the forge. The secret, whatever it is, must be connected to this place. We are missing something." He stood in the center of the room, his lantern held high, his keen gaze sweeping over every detail one last time. His eyes came to rest on the Braun Brothers practice area, which we had passed on our way in. A set of enormous barbells and dumbbells lay on the ground. "Curious," Holmes murmured, walking towards them. "Why would they store their equipment here, in this damp and derelict shed, rather than in their own tent?" He bent down and examined one of the larger dumbbells. It consisted of two massive iron spheres connected by a thick bar. He ran his fingers over the surface of one of the spheres. "Watson, bring the light closer." I held the lantern steady. On the side of the iron sphere, almost invisible under the grime and rust, was a small, keyhole-shaped opening. "By Jove, Holmes," I whispered. "Indeed, an old-fashioned strongman's trick. The weights are hollow, used for smuggling contraband, or, in this case, for hiding secrets." He took the small iron key from a pocket. It slid perfectly into the lock. With a sharp click, a section of the iron sphere sprang open on a hidden hinge, revealing a small, hollow compartment within. And inside that compartment, nestled on a bed of yellowing cloth, was a small, leather-bound ledger. Holmes lifted it out as if it were a sacred relic. He opened it, and I shone the lantern beam over his shoulder. The book was filled with page after page of entries, written in a cramped, spidery hand. It was a meticulous record of names, dates, and sums of money. "What is it?" I asked. "It is Croft's account book of murder, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice grim. "Look at these entries. Antoine Dubois, final payment, $50. Date, June 1894. Marco Petrovich, final payment, 75. Date, April 1895. And here is the one we have been seeking." He pointed to the last entry on the page. It was barely a day old. "Fairdale Hobbs, Goliath. Final payment, $100. Date, November 1895. "Final payment?" I queried. "What does it mean?" "It is a tontine, Watson. A ghoulish, monstrous perversion of one. A death pact. Croft persuaded the original members of his troupe, the Curiosities, to enter into a pact. Each contributed to a central fund. As each member died, their share was divided among the survivors. The last one alive would take the entire pot." "And Croft has been hastening the process," I said, the full horror of the scheme dawning on me. "Precisely. He has been systematically murdering the members of the pact, one by one, forging their death certificates to claim their shares. This book is his private ledger, the record of his bloody profits. Hobbs was one of the original signatories. When Finn rediscovered him, Croft realized he had to be eliminated, not just because he was a witness to an old crime, but because he was a shareholder in this execrable tontine. His death was worth £100 to Silas Croft." He snapped the ledger shut. "This is the proof we need, Watson. This book, combined with Evangeline's testimony and the body in the well, will send Croft and his creatures to the gallows." He placed the book carefully inside his coat. "Our work here is done. Let us leave this place of horror." We crept out of the forge and made our way back across the silent marsh, leaving the seeping carnival of curiosities behind us, unaware that its dark reign of terror was about to come to a sudden and dramatic end. The web of deceit. We arrived back at Baker Street as the first grey light of dawn was breaking over the city. My mind was still reeling from the night's discoveries, the grim well, the hollow weight, and the damnable ledger that chronicled years of cold-blooded murder. Holmes, however, was galvanized. The thrill of the hunt was upon him, and his fatigue seemed to have vanished. "The trap must be sprung tonight, Watson," he declared as he lit the gasogene to prepare a much-needed coffee. "Croft is a creature of habit and supreme arrogance. He believes himself to be untouchable. He will put on his tawdry show this evening, as he does every evening. It is there, in his own arena, that we shall bring him down." He immediately dispatched 2 telegrams. The first was to Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, requesting his presence with a dozen armed men at the Mitcham Marshes at 9 o'clock that evening, and instructing him to maintain absolute secrecy. The second was a more cryptic message to his brother Mycroft, containing just 3 words: "Activate the Mitcham Constabulary." Lestrade, for all his bluster, is a bulldog when he has a clear scent, Holmes explained, and Mycroft will ensure that the local police are positioned to seal off any escape routes. Croft and his acolytes will find themselves in a cage from which there is no escape. With the forces of the law set in motion, Holmes turned his attention to the final act of our drama. "The key to a successful conclusion, Watson, is to ensure the players are all on stage. We must have Croft, Finn, and the Brawn brothers together. We must also secure the safety of Mademoiselle Evangeline. She is in the gravest danger. Once Croft realizes the leopard sail was a ruse, her life will not be worth a farthing." He fell into a deep and silent cogitation, surrounded by clouds of tobacco smoke. I knew better than to interrupt him when he was in the throes of creation. For an hour he sat motionless, his eyes closed, his long fingers steepled before him. At last he opened his eyes, and they were shining with the cold, hard light of a perfect and inexorable plan. "I have it," he announced. "We shall use Croft's own theatricality against him. The show must go on, as he's so fond of saying, and we shall be in the audience." That evening found us once more approaching the gaudy lights of the carnival. This time, however, we were not alone. Hidden in the shadows of a nearby copse of trees, Inspector Lestrade and his men waited for our signal. The carnival was a different creature by night. Torches and naphtha flares cast a lurid, flickering light over the scene, throwing grotesque, dancing shadows. A small, miserable crowd of locals had gathered, drawn by the promise of spectacle. A steam organ wheezed a discordant tune, a frantic and joyless melody that served as the overture to the evening's entertainments. Holmes and I paid our pennies and melted into the small crowd that was gathering before a makeshift outdoor stage. The first act was Finn the Juggler. He appeared to a smattering of applause, his green eyes scanning the audience. He performed his routine with a slick, professional air, but his smiles were empty, and he seemed distracted, his gaze repeatedly returning to the entrance of the main tent, as if expecting someone. Next came the Brawn brothers. They performed feats of strength, lifting enormous weights and bending iron bars. Their act was met with a mixture of awe and revulsion from the small crowd. They were creatures of pure brute force, their faces blank and impassive. Finally, it was time for the headline act. A roll of drums silenced the crowd, and a man with a booming voice announced, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you have been waiting for. The impresario of the impossible, the master of marvels, Mr. Silas Croft, presents the fearless Mademoiselle Evangeline and her ferocious felines." The canvas flaps of the main tent were pulled back, revealing the large circular cage within. Evangeline stood in the centre, whip in hand, surrounded by her 3 leopards. She looked pale and fragile in the flickering torchlight. Silas Croft himself stood at the entrance to the tent, acting as master of ceremonies. He was in his element, a charismatic showman basking in the attention of the crowd. It was at that moment that Holmes chose to act. He stepped forward from the crowd, his voice ringing out with commanding authority. "Silas Croft, I have a warrant for your arrest." The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The steam organ sputtered into silence. The crowd gasped as one. Croft froze, his showman's smile turning into a snarl of disbelief and rage. Finn, who was standing near the stage, dropped his juggling pins with a clatter. The Brawn brothers, who were just leaving the stage, turned, their brutish faces contorted with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Croft roared. "Who are you?" "My name is Sherlock Holmes," my friend replied, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. "And I am arresting you for the murder of Fairdale Hobbs, Antoine Dubois, Marco Petrovich and others. I am arresting you for running a carnival of blood." At the sound of that name, a collective gasp went through the other performers who were watching from the sidelines. It was their secret terror, now spoken aloud in the public square. For a moment there was a stunned silence. Then, with a roar of pure rage, Croft made his move. But he did not run. He was a cornered rat, and he intended to fight. "Finn! Brothers! Get him!" he bellowed. The grand performance. What followed was a scene of chaos and pandemonium. The crowd scattered, screaming, as the 2 giant strongmen charged towards Holmes. Finn, his face a mask of feral fury, drew a long knife from his belt and lunged not at Holmes, but towards the main tent, his target clear. Mademoiselle Evangeline, the traitor. But Holmes was prepared. "Now, Lestrade!" he yelled, and a shrill police whistle cut through the air. From the darkness, a dozen uniformed constables swarmed into the carnival grounds, Inspector Lestrade at their head. "You are surrounded, Croft. Surrender in the name of the law." The Brawn brothers, however, were not to be deterred. They were like maddened bulls, focused only on the man who had dared to challenge their master. The first one reached Holmes, his huge hands grasping for my friend's throat. I raised my walking stick to defend him, but it would have been as effective as a twig against an oak tree. Holmes, however, did not flinch. With a movement of astonishing speed and precision, he sidestepped the giant's clumsy lunge, stooped low, and thrust his leg out. It was a perfect demonstration of the martial art of Baritsu. The strong man, his own momentum working against him, gave a cry of shocked surprise as he was thrown off balance. He crashed to the ground with a force that shook the very earth. Before his twin could react, 2 of Lestrade's constables were upon the fallen giant, struggling to pin his flailing limbs. The second brother, seeing his twin captured, bellowed in rage and turned to face the police, swinging a discarded iron bar with deadly intent. Meanwhile, I saw Finn reach the entrance to the cage. Evangeline screamed as he fumbled with the latch, his knife glinting in the torchlight. I started towards them, my service revolver in my hand, but I knew I would be too late. Suddenly there was a flash of movement from within the cage. One of the leopards, a magnificent creature named Sultan, had been watching the scene with intelligent yellow eyes. Whether it was from loyalty to his mistress or from a simple animal hatred of the cruel, wiry man, he acted. With a deafening roar, the great cat launched itself at the bars of the cage, its claws extended. Finn cried out in terror and pain as the claws raked his arm, tearing through his coat and flesh. He dropped the knife and staggered back, clutching his bleeding arm. In that moment of distraction, Evangeline showed her courage. She snapped her whip, the lash cracking like a pistol, shot just inches from Finn's face, forcing him back further. At the same time, Holmes was dealing with Silas Croft. The impresario, seeing his henchman engaged, had made a break for it, dashing towards the darkness of the marshes. But Holmes was upon him in 3 strides. There was a brief, furious struggle. Croft was a powerful man, but he was no match for Holmes's scientific boxing. A short, sharp jab to the jaw sent the impresario sprawling in the mud. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun. The Brawn brothers, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, were subdued and clapped in irons. Finn, whimpering in pain, was being tended to by a constable. And Silas Croft, his fine clothes covered in mud, was being hauled to his feet, his face a picture of stunned, malevolent defeat. Lestrade, his face flushed with victory, strode over to Holmes. "A magnificent piece of work, Holmes. A clean sweep. When your message came, I thought it was another of your wild fancies, but you've delivered this whole nest of cutthroats right into my hands. The credit, Lestrade, belongs to the meticulous record-keeping of our friend Mr. Croft." Holmes replied dryly, producing the small ledger from his coat. "I believe you will find this makes for most interesting reading. It is a full confession." He then directed the inspector to the old forge and the grim secret hidden within its well. A party of constables was dispatched at once to secure the site. I went to the side of Mademoiselle Evangeline, who was now being shielded by the other frightened performers. She was trembling, but her eyes shone with a light I had not seen before, the light of hope. "You are safe now," I told her. "Because of you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You and Mr. Holmes, you have freed us all from the carnival of blood." As Lestrade's men led the prisoners away, a great weight seemed to lift from the entire encampment. The silence that fell was not one of fear, but of peace. The long nightmare was finally over. A retrospection at Baker Street. "It was really a very simple chain of reasoning, my dear Watson," remarked Sherlock Holmes some 2 days later. We were back in the familiar comfort of our sitting room at 221B Baker Street. A cheerful fire blazed in the hearth, a welcome defence against the November chill, and Holmes, clad in his mouse-coloured dressing gown, was in the finest of spirits. "Simple," I exclaimed. "Good heavens, Holmes, the case presented a veritable labyrinth of bizarre clues and hidden dangers. A terrified giant, a carnival of blood, a secret society of murderers. It was one of the most complex affairs we have ever undertaken." Holmes smiled and gestured with the stem of his clay pipe. "You see the complexity, whereas I saw the underlying pattern. The key, as always, was to separate the essential from the accidental. The essential fact was our client. A man of his extraordinary stature could not have lived a normal life. It was almost a certainty that at some point he had been an object of public exhibition. His own admission confirmed this. From there, it was a logical step to assume that his persecution was connected to that past. And the phrase, "carnival of blood"? A piece of theatrical melodrama, perfectly in keeping with the world of the travelling show. But it was also a clue. It suggested not a single act of violence, but a series of them. A system. This led me to dismiss simple blackmail as a motive. Blackmailers wish to keep their victims alive. These people clearly wanted Mr. Hobbs dead. Why? The most powerful motive for systematic murder is profit. That is what put me on the path to the tontine. The discovery of which was a masterstroke, Holmes. It was a logical deduction, followed by a fortunate discovery, Watson. The hollow dumbbell was a common enough device in the less scrupulous corners of the entertainment world. It was Mademoiselle Evangeline's key that confirmed its presence. Her courage in passing you that key was the true turning point of the case. Without her, we should have had no proof. And her fate? I asked. She has been provided for. My brother Mycroft, in a rare fit of practical philanthropy, has arranged a position for her at the London Zoological Gardens, where her expertise with large felines will be greatly valued. Sultan, the leopard who played so timely a role in the villain's capture, will accompany her. The other performers have been freed from their servitude, and the less savoury of them are being closely watched by the police. And Croft and his gang? They will hang, said Holmes with grim satisfaction. The ledger was a complete indictment. The recovery of Hobbs's body, along with the remains of 2 others from that foul well, sealed their fate. They confessed everything, each attempting to betray the other in the hope of a lesser sentence. A fitting end for such a fellowship. The carnival of blood has given its final performance. He rose and went to the window, looking down at the bustling river of London life flowing past on the street below. "It is a strange world, is it not, Watson?" he mused. "A world of such contrasts. On the one hand, we have the quiet, scholarly life of a man like Fairdale Hobbs, who desired nothing more than the gentle companionship of his books. On the other, the savage, predatory world of Silas Croft, a world of sawdust and spangles that concealed the heart of a ravening wolf. And for a brief, tragic moment, those 2 worlds collided. He turned back to me, and the firelight caught the aquiline sharpness of his features. "We could not save our client," he said softly. "But we have at least ensured that justice has been done, and we have shone a light into one of the dark corners of this great city and cleansed it of the evil that festered there. And that, my dear fellow, is in the end the only reward we ever seek." And with that, he picked up his violin from its corner, and soon the melancholy contemplative strains of a haunting melody filled the room, a requiem for a gentle giant and a victory hymn for the relentless logic that had avenged him.